And maybe if you could share a little bit more about Tilt for those that might not be as familiar with it. And then, your initial kind of, the growth mindset there and your approach to growth.
Yeah, so it's funny. I don't get asked a ton about this one, but it was we had our moment. So I joined this company just a few months or weeks after we raised our Series A. So we were kind of a hot YC company in 2012, and the company was interesting. Like this notion of crowdfunding at the time was just likened to things that were growing on Kickstarter, and then GoFundMe was kind of just getting going at the time too. So you would have like new products kind of raising funding before they would launch for like pre-orders and such, and then causes like medical fundraisers and that type of thing. But James, the CEO, who now runs a podcast and stuff, and is a investor, good content creator. He the insight was that that's a very limited view of what crowdfunding can be. And actually, if you envision what crowdfunding looks like in a mobile world, it actually wound up being much more for these kind of like smaller, more regular, more habitual, either causes or events or campaigns. And so it could be a group of college students raising money for like a spontaneous party they want to throw, or it could be you're walking around a community, you notice a pothole on your street and you want your neighbors to chip in for it, right? So we were seeing all sorts of stuff happen on the platform at the time, and it was growing like 20% plus like month on month, but really without a clear synthesis or like reason why. And so I was kind of joined to help demystify that and figure out where we had our strongest product market fit and double down on that. So most of the company at that time, with maybe one or two exceptions, were engineers like writing code. So we ended up finding we basically, the first couple months there, I'll go into a little bit of detail here, but I won't take us too far on this tangent. But I think there's maybe some lessons from it. Like, what I did the first couple months was just rank ordered all of our organizers by frequency of use, by how many times they've used it, and then just called them. And so I went through like 100, 150 calls, and like it turned out we weren't labeling things like, remember, this was 2013. Data infrastructure was a little bit lacking. And so some of this stuff is maybe a lot easier to do now. But at the time, actually getting on the phone was really colorful, just to understand like who these people were, how they were using the product, et cetera. And it turned out that most of them were actually like college students who were otherwise like, organizing either, Greek system stuff or clubs or, basically instances where they otherwise would have been collecting cash and checks. And usually for these like larger group events, so like kind of 20+ person campaigns where Venmo and PayPal were like becoming things at the time, but it was not convenient when you needed to go and collect from like 20 or 30 people. So that actually looked a little bit different than like this crowdfunding vision that James had pitched. And we took the company down this direction pretty hard to really focus on colleges and map out our growth on like a community by community basis. And so we got quite quantitative to understanding what is the threshold at which like a campus is penetrated, after which like, call it 10%, the rest, growth is basically a given from there. And we built this kind of community team to really do manual stuff and focus on getting them to that, call it 10% point. And then after there, we would kind of like, take our hands and go to the next school. And at that time, like Uber and some of these other companies were building like their market launch teams. And so, we hired some people out of there, and it looked actually quite similar. There's some lessons now in hindsight why that, it worked, but it might've been a costly strategy. And I think the big lesson from that company was not like growth was actually, it was growing quite fast, but we never found a way to, make it a great business. Remember, like Venmo was backed by PayPal, and so could afford to burn a good amount and be an investment for them. We had a bunch of VC backing, but it's not the same thing. So that's the story there. Oh, the last point I wanted to make on just growth there. So the lesson is probably around the importance of having like a growth model from the onset. And so we developed something called a user state model where the way the product works is if you're an organizer, you need to actually recruit a certain amount of contributors to the campaign to be successful, right? To successfully use the product, because the whole dynamic is no one is charged until it tilts, until a number of people like end up chipping in. So, so some of those users are going to be new to the network, and some are going to be, existing. And it's on the organizer to go and acquire them, which is, really, we didn't have to spend a lot in paid acquisition at that company. It's close to nothing. So, so that made for a really powerful dynamic. But we also we worked really hard to quantify the trade-offs between, hey, should I focus my product team on actually driving organizer repeat or contributor organizer retention, or actually driving net new contributors and surfacing new campaigns? Then these were very quantitative trade-offs that we, that we had to make. And I think it was very illuminating when we hired 2 analysts very early on. They were ex LinkedIn biz ops, who were probably the most high leverage kind of, people in that company, I would say. So, so anyway, there's some stuff we can go and do there if it's relevant, maybe later, but I'll pause.